Gen Z is entering the workforce with new perspectives and expectations.
In this podcast, we're here to listen to their stories and experiences, their successes and frustrations, and help employers understand the mindset and perspectives of the up-and-coming workforce.
Employers can't dictate what their young employees find meaningful. What they can do, however, is empower them to create their own sense of purpose and authentic connections.
Our curriculum is designed to help them do exactly that. East Valley Leader Lab is committed to paving the way for more curious, engaged, and connected young professionals in the workplace.
Hi, I'm Amanda Stradling, and this is Tim Eskew. We are the East Valley Leader Lab, and you're listening to our podcast, Mind and Body at Work. If our content resonates with you, we hope you'll click on the link in the show notes for a description of our newest offer, Helping Gen Z Thrive at Work. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah.
Our guest today is Nick Cawthon. Welcome, Nick.
Good, everybody. Good to see you.
So let me begin by introducing Nick. Nick Cawthon is a veteran user experience designer, researcher, and strategist based in the Silicon Valley area. He's principal of Guage Consulting and an adjunct professor in the data laboratory in the Design Strategy MBA program at the California College of the Arts. That's a mouthful.
Wow.
He's an organizer.
I get paid by the word.
Yeah,
Yep.
Good. You're doing well. He's an organizer for the IXDA and CXPA San Francisco chapters and does a lot of invited talks at places like Xerox PARC, Google, HeavyBit, PeopleNerds, and many others. So this is a little bit different show for us. We're talking about Gen Z this season, and we suspect that Gen Z is having an impact on user experience. And so we thought we'd get an expert to tell us about that. So we're asking Nick to help us understand how is Gen Z impacting and being impacted by the user experience industry.
Wow. Hot question to start off with. I have somebody, a mentor in my network, and that person in your LinkedIn algorithm that always comes up to the top, where every time you load the page, you see their post first. I don't know if they've associated me with them or them with me, but their voice always resonates. And their post was about how Gen Z only sees user experience as screens, that they are the digital natives, the ones that was the first generation to have the internet, and that their narrow-mindedness, not my term, was only seeing experience as the device, not all the things that lead up to it. And in your overly verbose preamble, you talked about the Customer Experience Association, and I know those kinds of buzzwords, and the Interaction Designer Association. Those buzzwords and taxonomies may be a little where each of those areas of focus are. But as it relates to Gen Z, I don't think that my mentor's comment was particularly accurate or true. I think that there is just maybe a instinct to raise these artifacts into importance, what the mobile app experience feels like, what the communication strategy, with the social media engagement, all things that are happening on devices and screens, how that plays into a greater service design principle of how a company or brand deals with its customers and constituents. So yeah, Gen Z, they're going to be communicated to in a vastly different manner than you would people who've been around a little bit longer like ourselves. And I think that the nature in which we approach business development, customer satisfaction measures, and relationship building would fall into context in an entirely different manner.
That's great. Let's back up just a little bit and tell us about your journey into the user experience world.
Sure.
And how it has evolved into what you do today.
Yeah. Given the nature and the name of this podcast, that mind-body aspect, one of my first memories, and I'll say professionally, but I'll even sort of generalize that to when I was my son's age, probably 8 or 9 years old. We were in the church hall here in Oakland, California, and one of the den moms there, it was a Boy Scout group,
great.
was responsible for keeping us busy for 20 or 30 minutes while they set up the apple juice and graham crackers for a snack. And she sat us down with pen and paper, 8 of us around a table, and told us to draw something. And at the time, I was interested in World War II and Spitfires and Messerschmitts and dogfights in the sky. And
Wow.
I remember
That's a very
remember the
smart 8-year-old.
this is it's all being colored in memory, but I remember what I drew, and I remember the focus that I had in that task, and this notion of flow state, which I think is the only thing we talk about as adults, in this ideal state of when time begins to slip away and we find ourselves thinking about nothing else but the task and the craft that's before us. I remember after that 20 minutes or so, picking my head up and looking around and having some sense of satisfaction and confidence in what I had drawn. And that to think that, to do this for 8 hours a day wouldn't suck. It would be actually enjoyable to me. And I was lucky enough to have parents who were in the applied arts, who fostered that kind of curiosity and enthusiasm, and had the privilege to be able to nurture that as I went along. So visual arts and design from even a very young age was that moment of reflection of, if I had to do this every day of my life, it wouldn't be a chore. And that translated into high school classes and summer camps. I had some similar experiences on my first week at a university, which is the University of Oregon, up in Eugene, where you put into an upper level class with upperclassmen and asked to do an assignment that the same kind of investment and involvement occurred in. So there are these sort of occasions in my development where, again, I don't think everybody else has these. That maybe they do, but they don't listen to them, or maybe they do and they're not able to act upon them, or maybe it takes them where they want to go professionally. Is that I was lucky enough to have a couple of these along the way that has steered me into paths, into schools and work experiences that still guide me to this day. And Tim, as you introduced me, you talked about design, research, and strategy. And the reason that it's in that order is because design was what I used to do a lot of. It's now underlying in everything I do, but it used to be the shingle that was outside the door where, oh, we can create you an interface or a website or a mobile app. But around 2008, 2009, the introduction of the iPhone, this notion of experience came up, where maybe it's not so much about how it's designed, because the companies like Google and Apple will have these kits of which you can apply a user interface design, and you don't have to build it anymore. You can color by numbers, partially to help their brand value improve and that everything looked the same, partially to provide a more legible and intuitive experience, because we know what a menu of tabs should look like. And then the notion was, okay, well, how do we understand what that experience is? And the second service you mentioned in design, research, and strategy was the research, the ability to conduct qualitative user interviews, human factors testing, and see where whoever created the design got it wrong, where that workflow is confusing, or that button shouldn't be there, or that word isn't the same. And it took away design from being subjective into objective, making sure it was efficient and effective and not confusing. And the last is strategy, where we can start to understand where in the market, or what are the tools that are needed, or where are the gaps and opportunities to think about how we might research and design a product that makes sense. And so that's the evolution as you've gone away from a commoditization of design as a craft and discipline, and more in the strategic advisory about what to design and how do we ensure it's designed correctly. That was a mouthful.
I've got a quick follow-up, if you don't mind, Amanda. So you mentioned, I think, 2008, 2009, when Apple sort of and others started sort of they were sort of predisposing what the user experience was going to be. But is that, how long before that was the idea of user experience? When did it come into your consciousness? Was it when you were in university or before that? I don't have a clear sense of exactly when it started, even though I was in that industry.
Do you ever play the game of, if I were doing this in my grandfather's time, how would I label it, or what would I call it? It would be human factors, where if you see sort of the old newsreels of somebody being strapped, like an Air Force pilot being strapped to a chair to try to see how it performs when they're, again, back to the airplane, methodology. Strategy forces, or does this knob? When we looked at industrial design and the design of dashboards, actual switches and knobs, this notion of human factors where we put it in front of a pilot or a user and we try to figure out how do we make it easier. In the days before screens and technology and devices, that's where it was. It wasn't called the same thing, but my guess is that a lot of playing that game of how would my grandparents do what I do means just changing a verbiage, but applying the same principles and techniques. So to answer your question directly, it's been around for a long time, but it was the pivot from UI to UX.
Got it. I almost got a master's in human factors, and luckily my test scores weren't good enough because I think I might have offed myself if that. I'm happy with the direction things went.
Yeah, good.
A little less technical for me.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Let's loop Gen Z into this conversation a little bit. And what do you think they're bringing into the workplace, and how is this evolution of user experience, from the way our grandparents might have done it to the way you have done it and the way it's happening now? What is Gen Z bringing into that?
There is a lamentation in the last 12 to 18 months about those who are coming into the workforce as the recent graduates, or even those that have been in for the last 5 to 10 years, of how are these junior designers ever going to survive? Because we've just swept the rug out from underneath them with the need to do production work, the need to do iterations and comps, the need to do basic research on product market fit and things that you would use to make strategic decisions. We don't need that anymore because a couple strokes of the keyboard into the flashing prompt has made the need for a junior obsolete. And so that's one perspective. The other is to say, you entering in this job market with a basic sense of skills and competencies and principles and hierarchy, you know how this works. That's what your education and training has prepared you for. Now you have this jetpack of which you can build it all yourself at a scale and a speed that was never available up until most recently. And so that kind of transformation of, I don't need to climb the ladder. I've got this jetpack that can take me to the roof if only I know how it works and how I can use it and how I can deploy it and how I can collaborate with others using this. I think that is something that should be empowering, not foreboding or intimidating, because it's, again, it is such a wonderful opportunity for those who are coming into the product design and development field to move faster and quicker than ever before.
I love that came up in this interview, because this is something some of our previous guests have talked about too. Like, Gen Z is moving quickly. They're progressing quickly. They gain skills faster than before. They're doing the research quicker, and it's because of the tools at their disposal, right? But sometimes it'll rub the older generation wrong a little bit. Like, hey, you didn't pay your dues yet. You don't already need a promotion. You don't already need a raise. But they kind of do have that shortcut if they're using it right. So I don't know. It's an interesting theme that is arising for sure.
Yeah, and nobody's used these tools before. Like, we're all starting from scratch. Nobody's got 20 years of experience like they would using design software or illustration software. Nobody can beat you technically because we're all at the starting line together. What does that mean? That means that we need to share in our progress, that we need to build up communities of mentorship. We need to have an amnesty if we work in organizations that are maybe afraid to adopt these kinds of tools, that there is an ability to try and fail of how we might integrate it into that. What would be difficult to me if I was in the early stages of my career and I found myself in an organization that wasn't willing to explore and to try and to fail, because that cycle is happening very quickly right now, and these tools are evolving very quickly. And although I might paint a rosy picture of you've got this jetpack and you don't need to wait for the boss to give you a promotion, the antithesis is also relevant, where you could be stuck in watching your friends launch and you sit behind using archaic tools and archaic processes.
Yeah, I think that the attitude we have around it is so crucial, right? In the Leader Lab, one of our lessons, we talk a lot about opening and closing moods and attitudes around things, and how when you approach a situation with fear, that it closes off possibilities and it closes off growth potential. But when you approach something with curiosity and see it as an opportunity, then it can really unlock a lot of amazing things. But it just really is the attitude you approach it with. And that applies to these new technologies.
Yeah, there you described it very well. There are people that I work with that have that fear of the cloud. Back before this notion of your work isn't on your hard drive anymore, it's up somewhere else, a place you don't control, a place that you can't pick up and move from room to room.
Sure.
And there's this sense of confidence that a file on a desktop had that being in a web browser on a tab didn't. And likely they got burned. They lost data. It was something that they had to go through a period of adoption and the learning cycles involved with using cloud-based applications. But those of us who did have the curiosity to see that the portability of data and the advent of SaaS platforms that weren't Microsoft Office, that could do more things and integrate with one another, really opened up a new way of working and collaborating with other people where we weren't using Excel for every single task. But again, there are those who came at that from a place of anxiety because of past trauma and experience and never were able to really go head on into cloud. I mean, same thing's true with back in the day, email servers couldn't be on the cloud. They had to be on-prem because of security vulnerabilities. And at some point, that just became common sense. It's like, no, we're not going to have storage closets full of computers because the risk of what could happen to them is much higher than a managed data center from a large enterprise company. I think the same thing is true with some of these generative tools today, issues around privacy, issues around reliability, ethical issues, climate impact issues are all sort of at the forefront of maybe I don't want to be curious right now. Maybe I want to keep this at an arm's distance and see how it shakes out. Because to jump head on into that is just to close your eyes and hold your breath that all of those other things are going to work themselves out.
So I'm curious, Nick, how these changes that you've been describing are impacting your work. Are you now doing user experience for the Jetpack for the tool set, are you is it allowing you to interact with these Gen Z folks and learn about how they interact with this stuff?
Yeah, we're cooking with propane, Tim. We try to make sure that we hold on to. I mentioned this earlier. The principles of the industry. I'll give you an example. I'm going into an audit of a major transportation, an airport, and I need to interview a dozen or so users about their process. And I will go into that recording the conversations like I always do. I take notes and I also record, and I give the power transfer to the interviewee to say at any point, if you want to stop this recording, please do so. And what I do with the recording is I transcribe it, I go back against my notes, and I make sure that I've heard everything correctly. What I also do with it is I put it into a model, and I begin to train that model so that after a dozen conversations, connections can be made, and that the model can begin to extend and draw out process flows and maps that will help me visualize. It goes from A to B to C, and then it branches to D or E. It can begin to be a repository of knowledge that is scannable and indexable. What has to hold true is that you make your interviewee aware of this, that you give them the power to turn it off. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to go in and I'm going to throw you into the cloud or the algorithm. It's I'm using this to better make sense. of large quantities of information. Um, and so I always want to hold on to those principles of clarity, of respect, of thought. But at the same time, as a consultant or a contractor, I get thrown into areas of professions and industries that I know nothing about. I've just finished a universal basic income study where I know nothing
Oh,
about
wow.
UBI studies. And so my first step is, instead of trying to read academic paper after academic paper, what I do is I go and find all the resources I can around the web that I trust and that are verifiable, and I train a model to reference them, so that as I ask questions of the model, it can say, from this paper I read that, from this paper I read that, from this paper I read that, and begin to be my research partner. And that's a great way to start, because if you put 100 PDF files into a folder, you're not going to get through all of them. But if you do so in a manner where you're training an agent to begin to call and respond to any clarification you might need, it's an entirely different way of working. You're building upon legacy knowledge.
That's fantastic. Do you have employees as you're doing this? What is your work structure like?
Yeah. Yeah, think of a motion picture. If we were to do a shoot in Tempe, Arizona, we would need a production studio. We would need craft services. We would need some actors and actresses. We would need somebody wearing a cowboy hat. And so, like the motion picture model, we put together teams because it's going everything from philanthropy of UBI studies to airport procurement cycles to product design and development for the Australian Stock Exchange. So the things that come across are so random that different resources for different projects. We might also discuss, I know you want to keep this back to Gen Z. This is front of mind for me as well. Where what that definition of success might look like for an individual, for a company, is that, does it mean that you can find variety and balance and frequency in the work that you do? Does that give success? Or is it that I have a lot of employees in a big building? Because I would guess that Gen Z has a totally different definition of success than maybe you or I did, even as recent as 5 years ago, when
So true.
Yeah.
buildings are now empty, and the nature of our work is now remote, and we don't have these same kinds of underpinnings and foundations that we might have early on.
That is something that's been coming out a lot in a lot of the interviews with the Gen Z workers themselves and what they value. And it's not the same thing that, like, myself as an older millennial, I mean, I thought about those like corner offices, the big shiny buildings, and you drive past them and they're so impressive, and the big teams and conference rooms. Like let's say my youngest sibling that's like 13 years younger than me, she doesn't care about that at all. She cares about a sense of community, flexibility, freedom, mental well-being, creativity, just a fluidity in her life. And that doesn't mean that type of structure is not successful, because it is in its own way, just like you're saying. And it allows for a lot more creative work to be done, I think.
Yeah.
That's a real asset of Gen Z.
Amanda, you would have been so impressed with my big shiny cubicle that I had at Intel
I would
25 years ago.
I know I would.
They were so impressive, those offices.
I once had a fish bowl. The fish was named Toggle. I worked for a company called Alta Vista, which was the Google before there was a Google. I was the UI designer for the world's first image search. And the reason that fish bowl, the fish was named Toggle, because we weren't sure if the fish would last longer than my job.
Could go either way.
It could go either way, on or off. I mean, Tim, I'd be eager to hear your thoughts now. As you advance in your career, the notion of stability, at least here in the Bay Area, where the snake eats its tail quite often, and that churn of the tech cycle does eat you up. And we're
Yeah.
seeing it today with the transformation of the industry, and washing out at an advanced age is even more scary than if you're Gen Z or a millennial and you can adapt and pivot and other things to do, because they don't make those gold watch companies anymore,
Right.
that can see you into the last 10, 15 years of your career.
Yeah, I was dealing with the non-technical side, working with project teams, reducing the friction, increasing productivity, making sure that people didn't harm each other, and trying to get things done incredibly fast. And, you would think that this has to do with people, you would think that these principles, would be sort of forever principles. But we had to reinvent the way we presented that, 3 or 4 times. And
Yeah.
in the end of my career, I decided I need to be helping these people cope with the pace of change, not increasing it, by helping
Right.
projects go faster. And that's how I got into embodied leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. I think leadership and coaching are things that I'm seeing my mentors and coworkers move into, is that they want conversations like this with those who are currently facing what it means to be a director level or a manager level and not knowing how to go from contributor to leader. And I would imagine that those are the same audiences that you're speaking to, of like, what does it mean not to do the work yourself anymore? I still struggle with that because I love the craft and I'm a technician and I love the problem solving that's involved, but sometimes it's not your problem. It's somebody that you need to help unlock, to get to the answer.
Yep.
So again, we all find our strengths in different
Yep.
places.
So I'm curious, Nick. You've talked about the the native technology use and how that's impacted user experience and user experience design. As you're out there talking with and observing and recording, especially the younger people, is there anything else you can share with us you're noticing how they're impacting the workplace, impacting the technology?
Yeah, we had this notion again, back to 2010 or so. Gentleman, I will butcher his last name, Luke Wroblewski, had this notion called mobile first. And it was something that rejected this notion, and we were trying to get it right for a decade of how do we design for these browser screens, because you had Netscape and you had Internet Explorer, and then the screen sizes were changing and the number of colors you could use were changing, and there were no frameworks in place to make it all easy to build. It was something that was a moving target every 3 to 6 months. And Luke came up with this concept of you're focusing on the wrong thing. There's this medium that has introduced itself, called a mobile device. And so if you make it work there, then what can be translated to the traditional web should be straightforward and easy. And that's still true today for the most part, where if you can have that mobile workflow, it will sort of solve a lot of ails. But going back to your question about Gen Z, and now you've taken those who maybe don't even use a desktop screen except for work. And we're even getting to the point now where, as agents come into the conversation, especially for those of you who are over there at the Salesforce conference, this notion of, are we even designing for humans anymore? Are there going to now be the equivalent of agents that are walking through websites and performing mundane tasks? We already see it with Google having a robotic voice call a restaurant and negotiate a table reservation on your behalf until it gets a response that sounds like a yes, and then adding that to your calendar. Those are features that have already shipped. We're seeing with these automated browsing agents that they're on the fringes now of their implementation, but certainly a reality of it. I think that as I look back at mobile first, or designing for the web, or designing for agents, that notion of that we're not going to really have much of these artifacts that we're traditionally meant to be designing for. Instead, it's going to be a larger experience. And that goes back to the first part of our conversation, where it's not necessarily about the digital devices. It's now about how a brand or a company relates and engages, influences, and encourages a younger generation. And I think that can be done through a number of different mediums, some of which I'm familiar with, others which I've not. So it's a bit of a roundabout answer to your question about how that's changing their use of technology. If anything, it's now sort of a multi-platform approach where, yes, you need to have a presence online, but it needs to also have extensions not only to a mobile device, likely into some of these generative platforms as well, depending upon the product, and then all of the different touch points that stand that up along the way, so that they're able to keep in touch with the brand.
What I was reflecting on when you were talking about that is, we started this season of our podcast in July, I think. And what I'm noticing is you and some of our other guests are describing such a dramatic change in the workplace, that in the duration of our season, things are radically changing. And so for the sake of the humans involved in this, I'm curious, how do you think some of these changes you were just describing are going to, what's the workplace going to look like for these people entering, just now?
Yeah.
I mean, do you have a sense for just some tangible ways that, they're going to see something different than you and I saw when we started?
Yeah, we are. There may have been a time in which you had a tool that there was nobody better in your cubicle farm than you. Then if we knew we needed whatever that might be, accounting software, design software, a development environment, if there was a tool to complete a task, we knew to go to Tim. If there was another type of tool, we knew to go to Amanda, whatever that might be. And that we each had our fiefdoms that we were really good at. And those tools were separate from one another because I didn't have the training or the expertise or the nuances involved with executing like that. I think you take all of those away, especially in the world of product design and development. There is now everybody staring at the same cursor and able to amplify our work through agents and integrations and things that the algorithm will sort out. How to analyze the budget numbers, how to program the calendar, how to design the interface. That's all strokes of a keyboard. That the technical aspects of knowing which menu and drop down and condition and programming function are being solved by communicating in real language about what it is you want. Back to your question about the workplace, when you take away those divisions of this person's good at this and this person's good at this and this person's good at that, how do you manage that everybody's swimming in the same pool? How do you keep the responsibilities and
or
the
even
tasks,
set roles,
or hire or budget or staff? It's intimidating to me because now anybody can be a UI designer like I was 20 years ago by a couple strokes of the keyboard, and that's great. Now I get to take that off my plate and begin to speak a higher level of what it is that we're trying to communicate, what are the UX issues with this workflow, and how does this fit into the bigger question of whatever the company is trying to do. But an engineer should be just as intimidated, where I don't need them to deploy anymore. I can go through code checks and look through the logs and put those errors back into the algorithm to fix it on its own. Whereas before, I needed to have a very distinct handoff where the designer gave it to the developer and the developer made it real. Now the designer can make it real just as easily. And so I think that an attention to training and mentorship and collaboration, co-working, in my case, product design and development, is that those two sit side by side and they both bring in perspectives and priority, even if they're using the same tools and the same kind of work environment. And I think Amanda, you mentioned it well, is that there is this notion from Gen Z to want to collaborate, to want to find a community, to want to trust fall one another about how it is we do our jobs better together. Because I think there's there is such disruption and change about, hopefully, the work environments that we're in, and the adoption of how these tools can make things real, that we're going to need each other to get through it.
I love that there almost seems to be a natural fit between the challenges that Gen Z is facing and some of the values and the really human elements that they're carrying within them that they bring to work. Like that example, like the need for collaboration and also just the innate desire for cooperation and community that they have. And I think there's a lot of examples of that in this generation.
Yeah. If you have a boss, ask them for the permission to fail. Ask them for the permission to try these things, see why they don't work, to have an investment. Microsoft Copilot won't get you there. That's not something that's localized to your specific needs. That's not trained on your data. That's something that's a general phone tree kind of answer. But to be able to apply these specialized algorithms, not the general ones, to be able to do your job a little bit easier. And I'm not talking about answering emails. I'm not talking about the spreadsheet. Gemini within Excel, Google Sheets is really premature. But to have the amnesty and the trust and the permission to take a portion of your day or a portion of your week to see how we can figure out, with the caveat, like they do in academic settings, they send teachers and professors on sabbatical for a year, provided they come back and they share what they learned. And to ask for a 5 to 10 hours a week of a sabbatical to say, my job involves this. I see that there's a technology or a tool that might help save me 20 to 30 minutes a week. But that over time is going to build up and save and save and save. It's not going to be this hand waving, we're all going to lose our jobs. We're all going to save a lot of time on one specific task. But I think that list of tasks is going to grow over time. But it starts with, again, a healthy work environment where you can collaborate, you can have the trust and faith of your supervisor, and that you can share back to your coworkers about, here it is where my expectations were met, or my expectations were underserved or exceeded. Because I think that's how we all learn together.
So you just answered my last question.
Great.
Which was, what advice do you have for Gen Z? That was nice. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
We're running out of time. So Amanda, do you have a last question that you'd like to put out there?
I just hope that managers hear that particular last piece of advice and that Gen Z will kind of take that to heart and really incorporate that into their lives. That weekly sabbatical, what a fantastic idea. And that's a little bit of it kind of is in line with the embodiment practice that we have, where we are taking regular time to check in with ourselves and to align our actions with our goals. That's something that we talk a lot about at the Leader Lab. So that's such good advice.
Great. Glad to have it. Thank you for having me.
Anything else, Nick, that you'd like to share in general before we wrap?
No, I am. I'm just attuned that this buzzword or trigger word of AI is being construed in a lot of ways, some fair and some unfair. And I deal with it at my son's high school, where the executive director doesn't like AI, feels that it steals your soul. The executive director has a punk DIY ethos, has done it all, but feels like those kinds of shortcuts are removing from the creative process. And I would guess that there are a lot of people out there that would say a certain coworker or a certain boss doesn't like AI. But be careful of those generalizations, because those can be, again, barriers to growth. To try to be curious about what is it, how we might alleviate that, what could it be that we could show value or proof, and try not to use the word AI. And try to just say, oh, hey, I had this assistant, or I had this prompt, or I had this generative tool. I try to go as long as possible in any of these kinds of conversations without using those two letters. because I think it brings up a lot of visceral reaction. And that's just the nature of where we are as a society right now. So, yeah, that's my advice to you, is to be curious. Put on that jetpack. Get onto that roof. Don't climb the ladder. We are all going from the same starting line, and I'll see you up there.
And is it okay if we call AI rutabaga?
Rutabaga. That's our
Going
safe
back
word.
to an earlier conversation we had.
Yeah.
This has been very illuminating, Nick. We really appreciate it. For me, you're giving me a sense of how things have even accelerated since I've gotten out of the direct rat race, and the impact it's having on people, which is, I think, equally important. So thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, we thank you for being here, and we will see you next time, and we hope that you will be well and keep moving.
This has been Mind and Body at Work with the East Valley Leader Lab. Please click on the link in the show notes for a description of our newest offer, Helping Gen Z Thrive at Work. This is our embodiment training to help new young workers integrate into your organization.
As always, if this content resonates with you and your cares, please like, share, and/or subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever it is you get your podcast. Be well and keep moving.